witness this morning is Heather Bell, and Ms. Bell will need to be affirmed.
My name is Bell. I'm going to have you affirm your evidence today, so please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you give in these proceedings will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Good morning, Ms. Bell. I'd like to start today with some questions about your professional background and your employment history. So I understand that you've been employed by the MTO since 2008. Is that right?
Yes.
And you are currently employed by the MTO?
Yes.
What is your current position?
Senior bituminous engineer.
And is that in the bituminous section?
Yes.
And am I right that the office where you work is now called the Engineering Materials Office, but formerly referred to or known as the Materials Engineering and Research Office?
Yes.
When did you start in your position as Senior Bituminous Engineer?
2017.
And prior to that, what positions did you hold with the MTO?
Materials project engineer and a project engineer.
Were those
an engineering development program?
And were those positions also in the bituminous section or different offices?
Different offices.
Were you employed before you joined the MTO in 2008, or did you come to the MTO straight from school?
Straight from school.
Okay. And where did you do your schooling?
McMaster University.
And what was your degree in?
Civil engineering.
Are you a licensed professional engineer in Ontario?
Yes.
As of when?
2000 and what would that be? 12.
In your current position as Senior Bituminous Engineer, do you report directly to the head of the bituminous section?
Yes.
And who is that?
Jalou Vasilio.
And when, prior to that, am I right that Pamela Marks was the head of the bituminous section?
Yes.
Would the timing be right that she was the head of the bituminous section until she retired from the MTO in and around June 2019?
Yes.
And in your current role, do you have any people who report to you?
No.
The inquiry heard evidence from a number of MTO employees back in May, and some of whom were former employees in the bituminous section. But just for our benefit as a refresher, can you describe what the bituminous section is responsible for?
The bituminous section is responsible for things related to bituminous materials, asphalts, tack coats, emulsions. So mostly we write specifications, and as a head office function, provide advice to the regional offices with regards to how to use those specifications and administer them. We also do research and develop new test methods to improve the roads of Ontario and use taxpayers' dollars better to make roads last longer.
And specifically, what are your duties and your roles as Senior Bituminous Engineer?
So I am the lead for the hot in place recycling specification, as well as the performance graded asphalt cement and recovered asphalt cement specifications. I'm also the regional contact for the bituminous section for the regions for Western region and Northwest region.
You said you were the lead for the hot in place recycling specifications. Can you tell us a bit more about that? What specifically is involved in that role?
So as the lead for hot in place specifications, I am responsible for updating the specifications, helping the region select appropriate jobs to do HIR, as well as helping field staff, quality assurance staff in administering the contracts during construction, interpreting the test results, and what to do when we get questionable results possibly.
And when did you start in your capacity as hot in place lead? Was that when you became the senior bituminous engineer in 2017?
Yes, with Pamela Marks, she kind of was passing the torch to me in that respect.
Okay, so she had Miss Marks been the lead prior to you?
I believe so, in the past.
You mentioned that you're the regional representative for the hot in place specification role. Are you the lead for the entire province or specifically for the regions that you mentioned?
For the entire province. The regional one is more just if they have specific issues, I will direct them. They contact me and I will direct them to the correct lead.
As part of the MTO's document production in the inquiry, we've received a number of scans or photos of pages of your notebooks, Ms. Bell. And I'll be taking you to a number of these notes during your testimony today. But before I do, can you describe for us generally what your practices are with respect to taking and retaining your notes?
So I'm not that great at taking consistent notes, but I do usually jot a few notes down during the day about things that I need to remember to do, as well as if I have a conversation with someone and there's things that I want to note while taking the conversation. They're not the most detailed notes, and I'm not that great at always putting the date on the page, but they help for me to go back and look at things, like to put on my to-do list mostly.
So you sort of use your notes as a to-do list, and then also to sort of write down things that are discussed in a conversation or items coming out of a meeting or a phone call or things like that. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. And are you preparing notes on a weekly basis, on a daily basis? What are your practices with respect to timing?
On a daily basis, I will usually write something in my notebook.
Okay. And would there be instances where, for example, you have a phone call or a meeting and you might not make a note?
Yes.
And were these your note-taking practices in 2018 and 2019?
Yes.
So as background to what I'm going to be asking you about today and what we're going to discuss, we know that the city of Hamilton was involved in lengthy consideration about the use of hot in place recycling in late 2017 and into 2019, and that the city was considering using the hot in place technology for resurfacing of the SMA layer of the Red Hill Valley Parkway. And as part of the city's investigation, they hired Golder Associates, and specifically Dr. Ludimir Uzorowski, to study the feasibility of hot in place on the Red Hill Valley Parkway, to do lab testing, and to provide guidance on the hot in place design and mix development. And around that same time, we understand that the MTO was also looking at hot in place recycling on a contract in Thunder Bay, and also considering using hot in place for future contracts. And so that's sort of the background piece. But before we get into some of the specifics of that, Ms. Bell, I'm wondering if you can tell us sort of in layperson's terms what hot in place recycling is and how it works.
So hot in place recycling is where you heat the pavement, the existing pavement, usually with infrared heat, to make it reactivate and warm, and then you will hot mill, which is using a drum with teeth on it to dig into the existing warm pavement to remove it from the road and mix it. Usually this is better than a cold in place or recycling, because they cold mill without heating it first, which can actually break some of the aggregates. So this is actually a gentler process, which then once you've got the material back off of the road, you will add some rejuvenating agent, usually a liquid oil-based product that when mixed with that existing old pavement will rejuvenate or re-soften the black asphalt cement, the tar product that we use to bind the aggregates in an asphalt pavement, making it like new again. And less prone to cracking again. And that's likely the reason you're recycling it, is because it's aged, asphalt cement has aged, gotten hard and started cracking on the road, and you want to take it up, make it soft again, put it back down with no cracks. So they mix it. They can add some new virgin or new asphalt cement from a plant if some is needed in order to add a shoulder or some added material that you don't have because you're using the existing material. And then mix that all together, place it like you normally would place an asphalt pavement with a paver, and roll it with rollers for compaction, and have a new surface.
Thank you. And I think one of the things you mentioned there was that using the heat doesn't crack the aggregate in terms of as compared to a cold in place. What other benefits are there to hot in place recycling?
The other benefit would be to the environment, because you are not digging up new aggregates, which are, non-renewable resources, as well as trucking those, crushing them, making a lot of new mix in a plant, which creates fumes, greenhouse gases, the trucking even, right, to site and back. So you save a lot of greenhouse gas emissions and other impacts on our planet. It's like a plant on wheels, and it's using up to 100% of the existing material, again, recycling. And the other benefit is that it also is cost savings, because you don't have to pay for all those new aggregates or a lot of new asphalt cement, which is fairly expensive, and getting is one of the most expensive components. So there's environmental and cost savings.
And when you talked, just spoke about the, maybe you said plant on wheels. Is that because the truck is actually, it's in addition to heating the asphalt and milling it, it's then remixing it and placing it back on the road?
Yes, it's mixing.
So it's like a truck on, or a plant on wheels?
Yeah.
Okay. And are there benefits in terms of timing compared to a traditional repaving or resurfacing?
Yes, that's also a benefit, is that it mills and places the lift in one pass of the lane. Traditionally, with a mill and pave job, you will have to have a separate milling machine that cold mills the material, and you put it into a truck and take it away, and then come and bring the new asphalt from the plant and pave it with a paver, usually a different day or a separate process. It's a separate, separate process. So it can take longer that way. This way you are milling and putting down all in the same pass, and it also can have safety benefits because you don't have that milled surface that people have to drive on. There's no difference in the lane you've milled and the lane you haven't milled. There's no drop off because you're milling it and then paving it to match exactly. So it can be a little bit safer and more convenient.
And sorry, go ahead.
Right, during construction.
Got it. So we've just talked about some of the benefits. Are there any downsides or limitations?
There's definitely limitations, as with any pavement treatment. It's always, we like to say, the right tool for the job at the right time. So it can only be applied to pavements that don't have structural distresses, meaning it's just the cracking is just within that surface layer, that top 50 milliliters that you can recycle. If it's any further down, you really should do a deeper treatment to repair that. Otherwise, it's just going to reflect the cracks back up. So that's one of the reasons you would only use it for before the pavement gets too deteriorated.
And in terms of the lifespan of a hot in place recycled surface compared to the new surface of a pavement that's done with a shave and paver, a more traditional method, what's the difference there, if any?
So we do estimate that it will be a couple years shorter with the hot in place recycling job, because so I think typically it's like maybe 12 years for a shave and pave, and it might be 9 to 10 years life you would get from an HIR job. That's the estimate that we use for our design guidelines.
Why is there that difference? What's the reason?
Well, just that it is a recycled product, so there is a lot of aged asphalt, and the rejuvenate agent may not be able to reactivate all of it, and so some may still be aged, and you might get some cracking sooner because it's harder and brittle.
Thank you. Registrar, if we could call up MTO 38667. Thank you. So, Ms. Bell, this is the November 2016 OPSS 332. And as I understand, it's from Chapter B of the Contract Design, Estimating, and Documentation Manual that's prepared by the MTO. As I understand it, these are the MTO's guidelines for design, estimating, and contract preparation for the use of hot in place on MTO roads. Is that right?
Yes.
And was OPSS 332, this chapter, something that you worked on or updated as part of your responsibilities as the hot in place lead?
Yes.
And can you tell us a bit about your involvement with this document?
So I was tasked with updating this by Pamela Marks, the head at the time, in 2016. Started by actually updating the specification, which is OPS 332, which is different from this document. And so once we updated the specification, then we would also update this CDED, is the acronym for the document you said. We also update that guideline to designers about how to select the job at the time. We update the specifications usually.
And it says November 2016 there in the bottom left corner. Would this document, to your knowledge, have been the version of the CDED that was in effect or in force in 2018?
Yes, to my recollection.
And the updates that happened in and around 2016, why was it being updated at that time?
So the MTO hadn't used hot in place recycling since the early 2000s. The equipment had left the province and we stopped putting out hot in place recycling jobs. And so at that time, in 2016, Pamela Marks, who had experience with hot in place as the head, wanted us to get back into hot in place recycling for the benefits we've talked about. She believed in the technology and she tasked me with updating them so that we could try to bring it back to the province for the benefits that we would like to see.
And Registrar, if we could call out the first paragraph under the bulleted sections. So Ms. Bell, this says HIR is not suitable for pavements exhibiting structural distresses, and then gives some examples, and then goes on to say HIR is not suitable for pavements exhibiting severe or very severe raveling or coarse aggregate loss due to stripping. And I think, is this what you were just telling me about in terms of what sort of pavements hot in place is appropriate for and not appropriate for?
Yes.
Registrar, we can end that call out. And in the second last paragraph and the last paragraph there, Registrar, if we could call those out. So that the first call out there says HIR is recommended only for existing flexible pavements, excluding SMA. And then in the next, the very last call out, it says the HIR process shall not be used to recycle SMA or composite pavements. So the MTO specifications in the CDED did not allow hot in place on SMA. Is that right?
Yes.
And why is that?
I believe that in discussions with Pamela Marks, we decided that we didn't want to do it on SMA at first, since we had done a complete overhaul of the HIR specification OPS 332. You know, updating it and raising the bar for the quality of HIR, expecting it to be a surface course. In the past, a lot of the times there was a new lift of asphalt placed over top of it. So we were going to be asking a lot more of the HIR process, and we wanted to test it out on some lower risk jobs and some mixes that we have HIR'd in the past and had experience with, to get it established in the province to show that it works. And then maybe eventually we would have looked at expanding what types of payments it could be done on.
Okay. So in the past, when MTO had used hot in place in the early 2000s, SMA wasn't something that that had been hot in place. Is that right?
To my knowledge, no. I don't even know if we had any SMA pavements yet, or when the first ones were.
And so, as I understand your answer, part of the concern would have been about lack of experience. Is that right?
Yes.
Were there any other concerns or issues, particularly related to the structure of an SMA pavement and recycling that?
Not to the structure. No. Or, sorry, I'm not quite sure what you mean by structure.
Sure. So, any concerns about fiber content in an SMA pavement?
I'm not really an expert on SMA, so I'm not sure if that was a concern.
were there any concerns about more generally in hot in place, the hot in place recycling process? Are there any concerns about friction levels of a pavement that is being considered for hot in place? Is that something that's taken into consideration?
No, usually we don't check for friction issues. For an HIR job, I would rely on the regional geotechnical sections who are recommending a job to have, check that it was structurally okay, as you said, right? So I'm trusting that they checked for jobs that don't have much cracking. They would also usually not choose a job that they know has a problem with friction. That would have been dealt with before, or it's a different method, obviously, because you can't have can't hot in place something that has an aggregate issue because you're not replacing those aggregates. So it wasn't something that's standard MTO practice to check for friction during an HIR investigation.
Right, and so the reason, as you said, as I understand it, that you can't hot in place something that has an aggregate issue is because those same aggregates that would be affected are then recycled and put back into the hot in place or the new asphalt. Is that right?
Correct.
Registrar, if we could end this call out. And if we could go to images 4 and 5 of this document. I think, Ms. Bell, this is maybe what you were referring to with the geotechnical region piece. So you'll see in the bottom of the image on the left side, there's a heading that says pre-engineering investigation. And under general, it says, this section describes procedures and tests to be carried out during pre-engineering contract investigations on potential ministry HIR projects. And then in the following pages, there is some discussion about what's involved in the investigation. And so am I right that an investigation or a pre-engineering investigation, like what's described in this section, is always a part of the hot in place process?
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, we need to make sure that the material on the road can be recycled. So mostly we're looking for the existing, so the gradation of the aggregates. It's more the, not the actual aggregates themselves, but how many large ones there are versus small ones is within an acceptable range, because again, it's hard to make that completely change. So you can make a little adjustment by adding some new mix, as I talked about, some new hot mix. So you could fix that, but we also are looking to see if the existing asphalt cement is too hard to be rejuvenated. And that's mostly the reason we will, if we find a problem during the pre-engineering investigation, it is usually that the existing asphalt cement is too aged and brittle to be rejuvenated, and then we cannot do HIR. So that recovered asphalt cement testing is important, but we also look at the asphalt cement content because if it's already too high, adding liquid rejuvenator would be a problem and fill in too many of the voids, and you can get the asphalt cement coming out on the surface. So we want to avoid too high of asphalt cement contents as well. And if the air voids are already too low, again, adding liquid to those air voids will result in even lower air voids. So those are some of the properties we are checking to make sure it's a good candidate. And if it meets those things we're looking for, then we will go forward with planning to do HIR on it. And if it doesn't, then we will probably change to a mill and pave or shave and pave option.
And would this also be the stage where you're looking for the aggregate issues that we were just talking about?
Sorry, which aggregate issues?
Like would identifying potential aggregate issues or possible aggregate issues that would make a pavement not a good candidate for hot in place. Is that also something that you're looking for in this investigation stage?
So no, this would be we don't do any tests on the actual quality of the aggregate for MTO jobs because but at the investigation stage, because before that, I would have expected the regional geotech to know that if there is an issue with the existing aggregate, then it's not a good candidate already. Like knowing that it's too severely cracked, you would know that before you do the take samples and pay someone to test them, right? So that we don't test the aggregates normally on an MTO job because we know that the existing road is good and has been performing, and so it's we know that the existing material is fairly good, and we just want to verify that the properties of how it was mixed for the air voids and stuff is suitable to add some liquid to it, right? And that the actual asphalt cement is within the range to be rejuvenated.
And am I right that investigations or considerations of pavements for hot in place, that's a site-specific process?
Sorry, the investigation?
Is? So when you're looking at a pavement for or you're considering hot in place, is it site-specific? So you're testing and investigating specifically the pavement that would be recycled?
Yes.
And that's because, as you said, if there are issues with cracking or aggregate issues, whatever, it's specific to that pavement that's being recycled. Is that right?
Yes.
So things like the feasibility, mix design, all of those elements, they're all tied to the specific HIR candidate.
I'm not sure what you mean by feasibility, but these guidelines would be applicable to the specific pavement, yes.
Okay. And in your experience, how long do these investigations usually take?
A couple months, I guess.
So this is an MTO document, and so, as you said, it applies to MTO roads and MTO jobs. But how does it apply, if at all, to municipalities?
To my understanding, it doesn't apply to municipalities. It's available publicly for people to refer to if they want to.
So a municipality could look to and use these guidelines if they choose, but they're not obligated or required to?
Yes.
And you may have said this, but just so I can cover it off in my notes, is top-down cracking a structural issue that would prevent the use of hot in place on a road?
It depends on the cause of the top-down cracking. I mean, you know, if it's contained with only the surface, it is possible, but the cause of the top-down cracking sometimes is the quality of the asphalt cement, which then is a problem to try and recycle because it may not be able to be rejuvenated because it was so hard that it's the reason it started cracking, not due to traffic loads or structure, right? So it would depend on the quality of the existing asphalt cement if it was the cause of the top-down cracking.
Registrar, I'm going to move on to the next document, but I believe this document needs to be marked as an exhibit. So that would be Exhibit 123.
Noted, Council. Thank you.
Thank you. And Registrar, if we could call up MTO 38687 at image 3. And we can end the call out on the left. Thank you. So Ms. Bell, this is an entry from your notebook. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this is the first contact that we see between you and the city of Hamilton in your notebooks. And you'll see in the top right there, there's no date at the top. I won't read it all out to you, but there are references you'll see to, it says Mike Beck, city of Hamilton. Then there's reference to Gary Moore, some references to fiber and HIR. And when I asked you before about your note-taking practices, you said you don't always date the pages of your notebook. And as I said, there's no date here, but I'm hoping that if I can take you to 2 other pages of your notebook, that can help us sort of narrow down the date. So Registrar, if we could keep this document up on the left, and if we could call out image 1 of this same document. So this is image 1, and it says April 13th, 2018. And then Registrar, if we could replace image 1 with image 7. And that says April 17th, 2018. So that was image 1 and image 7. And then on the left, we have image 3. So this falls between those dates. So what does that tell you, Ms. Bell, about when this note was prepared on the left?
That it was prepared between those dates.
Okay. So sometime between April 13th and 17th?
Yes.
But not able to narrow it down more specifically within that range?
No, I don't recall the exact date.
Okay. And so now looking at the undated note, and the reference to Mr. Beck. Does this refer to your knowledge to a conversation that you and Mike Beck had?
Yes.
What do you recall about your discussion with Mr. Beck?
Well, based on the notes and my recollection, we were calling because they had experience. The city of Hamilton, Mike Beck had experience with using some reinforcing fibers that the MTO was using and interested in their experience with. So these reinforcing fibers were Fortify and Ace are the product names of this aramid fiber that we were looking at trying. And I think the conversation and eventually went to that they were looking to resurface the Red Hill, and that I was the lead for HIR, and that we were talking about how MTO was doing our first job since 2003 in that year, in 2018, that summer in Thunder Bay, and that if Hamilton or Mike Beck, the city, wanted to come visit to see the process, I would look into whether they could come see it. And he mentioned that the Red Hill was an SMA perpetual pavement.
So you think it was a phone call that you and Mr. Beck had?
Yes.
And that you called him to talk about the fibers? Or the fiber technology?
I believe so.
And so the reference to the HIR, did Mr. Beck tell you, or did you come to understand in the course of that conversation that the city of Hamilton was considering using hot in place for the Red Hill Valley Parkway resurfacing?
I don't recall exactly how it came up, but I know that he mentioned that they were considering doing HIR on the Red Hill, and that's why the topic of coming to see our HIR came up.
Do you recall if he told you why the city was considering Houghton Place?
I don't recall.
Did he mention, Mr. Beck mention anything about the investigation that Golder was working on with the city?
No.
And I think you said that the reference there at the bottom, the SMA perpetual 40 those are features of the Red Hill Valley Parkway, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so the SMA surface course, that it's a perpetual pavement, and then I think the 40 would refer to the 40 millimeter wearing course. Is that right?
Yes.
Prior to your call with Mr. Beck, were you aware of any of those details about the Red Hill Valley Parkway, or are those all things that you came to learn through the course of your conversation?
I think I learned during the conversation.
And the SMA piece, do you recall if you and Mr. Beck spoke at all about the fact that in the CDED, the MTO did not allow Houghton Place on SMA?
I don't recall.
Thank you, Richard. We can end that call out. And if we could go registrar to overview document 9, pages 25 and 26. Thank you. So Ms. Bell, you'll see in paragraph 64 in the document on the left, this is an internal email at the City of Hamilton that Mr. Beck wrote to some of his colleagues, and you're not copied on it, but it's quite a long email, and it goes on to the next page. And in Mr. Beck's email, you are referenced. So registrar, if we could call out the 2 paragraphs sort of in the middle where it says with respect to the technology, and the paragraph below. Thank you. And so Ms. Bell, I'll let you read through this and just let me know when you're finished reviewing.
I'm done.
Thank you. So you see in the middle there that there's a reference to Mr. Beck having spoken to the PM at the MTO that is running this project. And this project, I believe, is the Thunder Bay project. And then he references you. What was your role with the Thunder Bay project? Were you the project manager?
So no, I wasn't the project manager in the traditional sense of a project manager. Like, as I said before, our role is more of advice, head office role. So the project manager at MTO would have been the geotechnical section, who was the engineer in the geotechnical section in Northwest Region, who was running the design and selection of HIR for that job. Once awarded, it goes to our operations section, and there would be an area contract engineer in charge of it, as well as a CA, contract administrator, to administer the project. So I was more of providing an advice and guidance role than running the project itself.
So more in connection with your role as the Houghton Place lead.
Yes.
The discussion that Mr. Beck refers to, do you know when that was? Would that have been the mid-April phone call that we just looked at, or possibly another phone call?
I can't recall which phone call he'd be talking about.
And just to place this in time, this is, it doesn't say in this email, just call out that, but Mr. Beck's email was on June 27th. So it's about 2 months later after your phone call. So do you recall if there were additional phone calls or emails or discussions between you and Mr. Beck at that time?
I can't recall. I'd have to see if I wrote a note. And again, as I said, sometimes I didn't write notes about all my phone calls, so I can't be sure if there were.
So it's possible that there was some additional additional contact, and that just didn't get reflected in your notebooks.
Yes, I can't recall if there was.
And looking at this email and recognizing that it's not something that you wrote, it's something that Mr. Beck wrote. Does it, and that you don't specifically recall the phone calls or the conversations that you and Mr. Beck had around this time, does the information that he relayed about the MTOs work in Hot in Place, does it appear accurate to you?
The only additional thing to the PM comment that I would correct is that he is saying that we were looking to complete the first Hot in Place resurfacing of an already Hot in Place resurfaced road. So technically, the road this is the Kenora bypass, the one we were looking for the 2019 construction season, the second HIR job we were going to do with the new specification. That job was Hot in Place. It was actually the last one we Hot in Place before Hot in Place left in 2003. However, it had an overlay, so it had a new layer of asphalt placed over the Hot in Place layer. So we were actually looking at recycling that layer, which was not a previously Hot in Place layer. So technically, we're not doing the layer that was already recycled. So that's the only correction that maybe he misunderstood in our conversation.
And you'll see there's also a reference at the start of this paragraph to Mr. Beck having spoken with Pamela Marks. Do you recall if you were aware that Ms. Marks and Mr. Beck had spoken about Hot in Place?
I don't recall, but it's likely that she talked to him, and we both were, talking to each other about Hot in Place. So I don't recall specifically her telling me though.
Okay, thank you. Registrar, we can end this call out. And so, Ms. Bell, as I said, this email comes in and around or on June 27th, and the next email that we have between you and Mr. Beck is from July 30th, 2018. And there's a number of emails exchanged between the two of you around this time. So I'll sort of take you through those documents, and then I'll ask my questions at the end of that. So Registrar, if we could call up first Ham 1390 at image 2. So this is that July 30th email from Mr. Beck to you. And in the last paragraph, he says, as for the Red Hill Valley Parkway, we, the city, has started our investigation process into recycling of SMA using HIP. Talks about Golder's investigation to work on the mixed design analysis, and references samples being taken that are being used to determine the mixed design. And that says, if you are interested, I can keep you in the loop on our findings as we progress through the process. And Registrar, if we could keep this document up and call up MTO 38687 at image 8. And so this is your notebook. And there's an entry 2 days later on August 1st, 2018. It says City of Hamilton at the top. And there's a number of notes there referencing BC Contact, the City of Toronto. There's a phone number there in the middle, which I understand to be Mr. Beck's office phone, and then a number of other notes that appear to be responsive to some of the questions that Mr. Beck had asked in his July 30th email. And then looking back at the note or at the email chain on the left, there's another email, Mr. Beck responding to his own email on August 3rd saying, "Hi, Heather. I just wanted to let you know that I did get your voicemail and that he apologized for not having gotten back to you sooner," and referencing that he would try to call you if you were around the next week. So looking at those three notes from July 30th, August 1st, and then August 3rd, and do you think that the August 1st notes pertain to communications, possibly the voicemail that a voicemail that you left for Mr. Beck on that date or in and around that date?
Yes.
And looking at the notes, do those reflect things that you either wrote in your preparation for a call to Mr. Beck or that you would have communicated in a voicemail?
Some of them are in preparation for responding to his email, likely in conversation with Pamela Marks as to what we should respond to his email, his questions on July 30th there. I probably did not share all of this in the voicemail, as some of it was probably notes from just about HIR with Pamela.
Are you able to distinguish, looking at the notes, what you think would have been made in preparation and then what would have been things communicated on the voicemail?
I don't believe I wrote things during leaving the voicemail. I probably wrote these in preparation and then just said the voicemail while looking at these. So I wouldn't have written notes about specifically what I said in the voicemail.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Register. We can end the call out of the notes. And if we could keep up ham 1390, but if we could have images 1 and 2 of that email chain up. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so Ms. Bell, you'll see then on the left, there's quite a long email that you send to Mr. Beck on August 7th. And there is a notebook entry also in your notebooks. I can take you there if it's helpful, but there is a notebook entry reflecting that you sent him an email response as well. And looking at this email from you, it looks like there's some overlap in terms of the notes that we had just looked at in your notebook and the information that you communicated in your August 7th email. So is that fair that the information in your email is generally consistent with the notes you made on August 1st?
Yes, I think there's some things in the notes that I didn't put in the email. As I said, they were more for my reference in my conversation with Pamela. And the email is more just responding directly to the questions that he posed, and so not everything in the note was put into the email.
And at the top there, it says attachments, the CDED B332. So you sent Mr. Beck the CDED guide that we had just looked at. Do you recall why you sent him that guide?
Just to be helpful in providing some of the things that MTO looks for in selecting it and does for our testing. So just to provide him some guidance, advice, if he was to look at it, about what MTO has done on our new version of HIR.
Okay. And in your email, you say, regarding the longevity of HIR, I would recommend you first look at Hamilton's history with HIR. So there, what was the basis for your knowledge that Hamilton had done hot in place in the past?
So through conversations with Pamela Marks, she had indicated to me when we were discussing Mike Beck's questions that she told me that Hamilton has done a lot of HIR in the past, likely in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s when MTO was also doing it. I wasn't at the MTO at the time, so, and she was, so just secondhand from what she's told me. I believe also some HIR contractors have told me they used to do some HIR work for Hamilton, so I knew they had done it in the past from secondhand from people saying Hamilton had done it.
And I asked you before about whether you were aware in your earlier conversations with Mr. Beck about Golder's investigation. And in the July 30th email, there's a reference there to Golder having been retained for that process. So do you think you were aware prior to receiving Mr. Beck's July 30th email, or would that have been possibly the first time you were made aware of Golder's investigation?
I'm not sure if you mentioned it in a phone call before, and it's likely this is the first time I heard about it.
And the elements of the investigation that Golder had been retained to do, are those consistent with the steps that MTO would typically take in their investigation?
So I'm like, just from what this email says their steps were, because it's not very detailed about what they're doing.
Yeah, so are those things, I guess, just based on the information that he provided, are those sort of things consistent with things that MTO would also have done?
So MTO would have looked at past mixed designs if we had them available of the road we were considering. As well, we would take samples and do testing. We normally wouldn't actually complete a full mix design if that's what's being implied here.
Why is that?
Because the mix design is left up to the contractor. It's his process. We don't normally dictate how they will design a mix. We leave that up to the contractor because they choose which rejuvenator they're using. So we can't really do a mix design ahead of time, not knowing what products they're going to use, as well as if they're going to add new mix, we can't predict what their mixes they have, what aggregates they have access to complete a thorough mix design. So we just do kind of analysis, some checks, estimates to, see that it seems like a reasonable candidate, that adding a reasonable rejuvenator that we know are out there and some type of mix that is possible to make would work. So we don't usually spend the time and money doing a full mix design because our contracts do not dictate to the contractor the mix design he shall use. We leave it up to the contractor to make their own mix that will meet what we want. MTO more does end results. We look at the final product meeting the requirements, performing as we expect, not telling them to use certain things.
Okay. And so your email doesn't say anything about the MTO's restriction on hot in place for SMA. Do you think by this time you and Mr. Beck had discussed that the MTO didn't do hot in place on SMAs?
I can't recall.
Was that ever something that you and he spoke about specifically?
I don't remember.
Given those restrictions in the CDED that we looked at, did you have any concerns about the city's consideration of hot in place on the SMA surface course, or the feasibility study that Golder had been retained to do?
No, I thought it was a very reasonable thing to do an investigation and maybe even look at doing a mix design, which is a further step than I just explained MTO would do, because it is a different type of mix than the typical super pave mixes that we were looking at hot in placing, or MTO was. So I was more just interested in their results. And if there was anything in the lab work that showed it was or was not possible, so that it would help us with experience or going to see Hamilton's SMA being recycled to get the experience and feel comfortable possibly doing it on an MTO job. So
okay, so it wasn't something. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just more interested in their results.
That was going to be my question. So it wasn't something that concerned you. It was something that interested you from the perspective of forward looking for things that, depending on how it went for the city and in their investigation, something that possibly MTO could consider.
Yes.
And is that in your email where you say we would be very interested in your findings for hot in place of the Red Hill Valley Parkway? Is that sort of just you communicating that interest to Mr. Beck?
Yes, and in his email, he says you can keep me in the loop on the findings as we progress through the process. So that was me confirming I was interested in being provided with some results and information about how it goes.
And I asked you this before when we were talking more generally about hot in place, but in the third last paragraph of your email, there's a reference to the life expectancy of hot in place roadway. And it says, properly designed and constructed HIR resurfacing has a minimum life expectancy of approximately 9 to 10 years on a non-freeway and 8 to 9 years on a freeway. So the minimum life expectancy, what sort of factors would affect or impact the actual life expectancy of an HIR surface?
The traffic volumes, which you can probably infer from that it's longer on a non-freeway versus a freeway, which has higher traffic volume. So a lower life expectancy because it's getting beat up more, higher loads cause it to crack sooner. Yeah, I mean that, and as I think I mentioned earlier, that the recycled material has some older asphalt cement that's brittle, will be prone to aging faster even if it's rejuvenated. So will crack sooner than a new asphalt cement pavement.
Thank you, Registrar. We can end the call out of this document. So now, jumping forward a few weeks in time, Ms. Bell, I'll take you to Registrar Overview Document 9, Image 62. That's not right. Hold on. You can close that call out just a moment. Sorry, it's image 51 and 52. Thank you. So Ms. Bell, you'll see in paragraph 123 there, there's a transcription from your notebook on August 21st, 2018. So we've just typed up your notes. And Registrar, if we could call out that transcription. Sorry, it's just the one, just the other one. Thank you. Ms. Bell, are you able to help us out? Is this a phone call that you had with Mr. Beck on that day?
Possibly.
Okay, I believe that the phone number there is Mr. Beck's office phone, if that helps.
Yeah, again, it could be it could be that I called him. That's why I wrote the number down, or I could have written it down, written it as a preparation and then written it down. But definitely the second paragraph there that starts with his name would have been a phone call portion. And
with reference to your notes, or what are you able to tell us? What do you recall about the phone call or the conversation with Mr. Beck on August 21st?
It looks like that he told me that Golder and Ludemore was running the investigation for the Red Hill. I don't recall what the 12.5 FC2 from mix would be about. Solid pieces means the samples they took were solid slabs, not cores. And then it looks like he told me the Red Hill was paved in 2007 and opened in November 2007. And then again, more about the samples were 20-meter patches. And there were 3 of them. And that maybe they needed to take some more. I'm not sure about the new patches needed. And then I'm not sure what should 12.5 lanes SMA means. Hazardous material RAC is asking, I guess he was asking me whether transporting the recovered cement samples would require hazardous material transportation or not.
Okay, so does the RAC stand for recovered or reclaimed asphalt cement?
Recovered asphalt cement, yes.
And so would this, sort of with reference to the notes and the emails we had looked at before, was this the information that Mr. Beck gave you or that you spoke about? Was that more of just an update about sort of the status of where things are at on the city side?
I believe so.
Okay, thank you, Registrar. If we can close that call out. And Ms. Bell, I'm going to take you to another document that you aren't copied on. It's an internal city document. Registrar, if we could call up HAM 35540, images 1 and 2. So Ms. Bell, this is a chronology of events that staff at the City of Hamilton put together. And you'll see on the left, or sorry, on the right side, there's sort of about 2/3 of the way down on August 21st, which is the day we just looked at, that you had a notebook entry. It says Heather Bell from MTO forwarded HIP spec to Mike. And so Registrar, if we could keep this document up, image 2, and call up also MTO 38662 at image 2. And so you'll see, Ms. Bell, towards the middle there's an email, another email from you to Mr. Beck saying, "Hi, Mike, before I forget, below is the CA contact info for the HIR contract." Thank you, Registrar. And so I just want to sort of piece together what was sent on what days. So the chronology says that the HIP spec was forwarded on August 21st. And here we have an email where you're forwarding the CA contact information. So do you recall if you did send the spec to Mr. Beck on that day, or was it just the CA contact information that you sent?
I believe I just sent the CA confirmation or contact information on that date.
Okay. And I think we had looked at the CDED that you sent at the beginning of August. So possible that there was just a mix-up of dates on the city side of what was sent on what days?
It's possible.
But you didn't,
city, so I don't know.
right. But just from your perspective, this was, to your knowledge, just looking at this, there was nothing else that you sent on the 21st?
Correct.
Thank you. And why were you sending this contact information to Mr. Beck?
We had discussed him coming up to Thunder Bay to see the HIR process on our job that was going in 2018. Since they were considering doing HIR, we had invited them to come see it. So to be able to go visit an MTO construction site, you need to notify the contract administrator who's in charge of everything to do with that contract. So that's why it's providing the contact information, so he could contact them and let them know what day he wanted to come see it and arrive on site safely and properly.
And Registrar, we can close the document on the left there. But if we could keep up image 2 and also call up image 1 of that document. Thank you. So Ms. Bell, you'll see that the email chain between you and Mr. Beck sort of continues on throughout September 2018, following your August 21st email. And there's some emails where you appear to be following up with Mr. Beck about his request to go up to Thunder Bay and letting him know what your plans or the MTO's plans are and discussing the potential visit. Am I right that the city's visit to Thunder Bay didn't actually ever take place?
That's correct. From my knowledge, it didn't take place.
What was your understanding of why it didn't take place?
I think just Mike was too busy to find the time to go. That seems to be what he told me, I believe.
Okay. And there in the very top email, which is on the right side, the top, you have a line that says, "Let me know how Golder's investigation goes." And that's consistent with what you had written in some of your earlier emails that we looked at. Do you recall if Mr. Beck did keep you updated on how the investigation went?
No, I never saw any actual test results.
And did he we'll come to some discussion that you and Mr. Beck had in later in October, but sort of between this time in late September and the end of October, was there any contact between you and Mr. Beck where he updated you?
No.
Okay, thank you, Registrar. We can close those documents down. And if we could call up images 91 and 92 of overview document 9. So Ms. Bell, you'll see in paragraphs 227 and 228 on October 23rd, it doesn't say the date there, but it's October 23rd, that the MTO received a media inquiry from a reporter at the Hamilton Spectator related to resurfacing of the Red Hill Valley Parkway. And the inquiries received a number of different email chains where the initial media request was sent, and then there are some subsequent follow-up questions from the reporter that were circulated and discussed internally at the MTO. And I won't take you to all of them, but I will take you to one of them. Registrar, if we could call up MTO 38653. And if we call up images 1 and 2. So you'll see, Ms. Bell, looks like there's a number. It's a bit hard to read, so I'll call out the email that I want to take you to. But it looks like there's a number of emails where the question from Nicole O'Reilly at the Hamilton Spectator gets sent to the media office at the MTO, and then after some internal circulation, it eventually gets sent to Stephen Lee. And I believe at this time, Mr. Lee was the head of pavements and foundations. Does that sound right? This is October 2018.
Yes, he was the head of pavements.
So Registrar, if we could call out on the document that's on the left side, the response from Mr. Lee, that entire email? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So Mr. Lee sends a response at October 23rd at 1:04 p.m. And you'll see that Ms. Bell, you are copied on this response, as well as Ms. Marks and Ms. Lane, and a number of other MTO staff. And so do you recall, appreciate that you weren't copied on the initial inquiry, but do you recall receiving these emails about these media inquiries?
Yes.
And what, if any, involvement did you have in preparing the response that Mr. Lee circulated?
I helped draft some of the wording to the first question.
The first question, I know there was a pilot using hot in place happening.
Yes.
And can you tell us which part of the response you helped draft, and sort of what steps you took to prepare that response?
My recollection, I probably talked to Pamela Marks about it, as I was not I wasn't around when the pilot happened on the 401, so I went to her to ask if she remembers that happening in the past and what we can write about it. And then I would have drafted some of this response and sent it to her for review. For her and Stephen, I'm not sure who I would have sent it to.
So you would have had some discussion with Ms. Marks and possibly also with Mr. Lee, and then as a result of that discussion, this answer gets generated and sent by Mr. Lee?
To my knowledge, yes.
The last bullet under this question says, it's our belief that the project Hamilton was considering would have involved recycling stone mastic asphalt mix, which to date, the ministry has no experience hot in place recycling. Did this information come from you about the belief that the city was considering HIR was an SMA?
Yes, this was drafted by me in consultation with Pamela Marks based on my knowledge of conversations with Mr. Beck about that they were considering hot in placing the Red Hill.
Okay. And just looking at the top there, there's a bit of a lead-in, which I understand comes from the Hamilton Spectator reporter, where she says the city had been considering hot in place technology, but said it doesn't have enough information that it will work here, so it's moving ahead with regular resurfacing. This email, was this the first you heard or became aware that the city was going to be moving ahead with a regular resurfacing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Registrar. We can close out that document. And I believe this document will need to be marked as an exhibit. So that would be exhibit 124.
I think it's 123.
I think I marked another document earlier this morning as 123.
Okay, sorry. I'll double check.
Thank you. And Registrar, I believe the last document I called up just while I'm on this, I believe the last document that I called up, which was MTO 38662, also needs to be marked as an exhibit. So on my end, that would be exhibit 125, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We can close out this document.
Just before we go, now I'm confused. We've got MTO 38667, the OPSS 332 page. That's exhibit 23.
Yes, 123.
And which was 124?
So this document that I have up right now, Commissioner, MTO 38653.
Yes.
That would be 124.
Okay.
And the email chain that I had up previously, which was the August 21st into September email chain between Ms. Bell and Mr. Beck, which is MTO 38662.
Okay,
That would be 125.
thank you.
Okay, so keeping on the subject of the media request on October 23rd, Ms. Bell, Registrar, if we could call up MTO 38704. So, Ms. Bell, this is a continuation of the chain following the MTO providing their final response on October 23rd. And you'll see on October 24th, there was one follow-up question that was sent where it says, the city of Hamilton said that the main reason they're not using hot in place recycling is because there isn't enough information that it works here because the MTO project outside Thunder Bay is behind. Can you clarify? And appreciate you aren't copied on this follow-up response, but just more for our benefit, the to your knowledge, would the MTO's Thunder Bay project have had any impact on the city's own analysis of the hot in place on the Red Hill Valley Parkway?
I don't think I can comment on whether the city would have considered how our project was going. I don't know what can you try to rephrase what you're asking? Sorry.
Sure. So the MTO's hot in place project in Thunder Bay, that as I understand it, that was not an SMA pavement, correct?
Correct.
So and so the information about it working here, would that I interpret that as either being the hot in place technology or the hot in place technology on the specific type of pavement that's being considered by the city. And so I guess my question is really more, what impact, if any, would the city's or the MTO's progress on Thunder Bay have had on the city's consideration?
I can guess that if I was the city, I would maybe be concerned that they didn't get too far, or maybe they're concerned about it not being working in our climate, but I'm not sure it really has much bearing because we've done HIR in the past in Ontario, so I'm not too sure what this means.
That's helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it's not your investigation, not something that you're considering, but that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Registrar. We can close out this document. One moment, Ms. Bell, sorry, bear with me. So Registrar, if we could call up overview document 9, image 93. Thank you. So you'll see there, Ms. Bell, there's an email that Mr. Beck sent internally at the MTO, at the city to Mr. McGuire and Miss Jacob about a call he received from the MTO. He says, I got a call from the MTO today. The spectator contacted them about HIP. The MTO provided them with information regarding HIP, but also included the fact that they do not allow it on SMA. They did not go through my contact, and the information was provided by their communications department. And so the call that Mr. Beck references there, was that a call with you?
I don't know what his email is referring to, but I would assume, yes, it's about the call I had with him.
And I can take you to, perhaps this might assist, I can take you to a transcription of your notes, which are registered at, I believe at overview document 9, images 91 and 92. Perhaps that might assist. Oh, sorry, I think it might be 92 and 93. I might be off by a page. There we go. So if we could call out those notebook entries. So Ms. Bell, looking at these, which are a transcription of your notes, do these assist at all in refreshing your memory about communications you and Mr. Beck had on October 23rd?
Yes, I knew I had a conversation with him. I didn't know if in his email he's referring to his call with me specifically or with somebody else. It's likely with me, but I can't confirm what his intention was, but he wrote it is what I meant.
Okay, understood. Okay, so now that we have these notes up here, what can you tell us about your conversation with Mr. Beck on October 23rd?
That I called him after receiving the media request because it was, as we established, the first time I had heard that they were not proceeding with HIR on the Red Hill, and I was interested in finding out what caused that. So these are my notes from that phone call. Well, part of it is immediate response. The second bullet that with the HIR is the actual phone call.
Okay. So would that be where it says it's our belief Hamilton project?
No, that's part of the first HIR bullet, which is the media response.
Okay. So it's the samples came back, friction numbers, and below that?
Yes, that's the notes from the phone call with Mike Beck.
Okay. And can you tell us what you and Mr. Beck discussed on that phone call?
So I called him to tell him that we got a media inquiry from the Spectator that Hamilton was no longer considering HIR on the Red Hill, and that was the first I heard of it. And so I called him asking, oh, so I hear you're not doing it anymore. I'm interested to find out what the reasons were. Did you get results from Golder that showed that it wasn't feasible? I was more, interested in what about the pavement, because typically on an MTO job, it is the recovered AC is too hard. So I was expecting something like that, but maybe since it was SMA, there was something else. So my notes are here that he told me that the samples from Golder came back with friction numbers that caused them some concern. And so that was the reason they were not going to HIR it. He said that even using a beneficiating hot mix, so the new hot asphalt of 30 to 40% of a 12.5 FC2 mix, and a 15 millimeter grade increase by adding that new material would still probably not solve the problem, I think. The 50-50 probably means that they would have to do 50 new material to 50 of the existing material in order to get a PSV which I think is polished stone value, in an acceptable range. So that's, I think that's mostly he told me that they weren't going ahead because the friction and the aggregates were a problem, and that was the extent of the conversation.
And what specifically, if you recall, did he say about why there was a concern with the friction numbers or the aggregates, or what the specific source of the concern was?
I don't recall. I think from my notes, it seems mostly he just said that the friction numbers were a concern. He didn't say specifically what they were or how, if they were really bad or not. I don't know how bad they were from the conversation, just that there were some concerns with the numbers, and therefore they are saying it's not a good candidate for HIR. So I don't know how bad they were or good they were.
And was your impression from your conversation with Mr. Beck that at that point the city had decided they were not going to do the HIR, and they were going to proceed with a regular resurfacing or a shave and pave?
Yes.
And I had just taken you to that email where there was the media request about the city not having enough information because of the status of the MTO's Thunder Bay project. Did Mr. Beck express anything related to that about the city not having enough information because of the delay in the MTO's Thunder Bay project, or was that something that wasn't discussed?
Not to my recollection. That's the first time hearing about it.
Okay. And after you spoke with Mr. Beck on October 23rd, were there any further discussions that you and he had related to the hot in place recycling on the Red Hill Valley Parkway?
No, this phone call is our last discussion.
Throughout your discussions with Mr. Beck, and sort of when we looked at from April 2018 up till now in October, was Mr. Beck the only person you spoke to at the city about the RHVP HIR consideration?
Yes.
You didn't. So any information that you received about the city's investigation, leaving aside the spectator inquiry, any other information that all came to you from Mr. Beck?
Yes.
Thank you. Richard, we can end that call out. And Ms. Bell, there are some references to your name in Dr. Ludmila Zarowski's notebooks that are sort of in and around the same time period as what we've just been talking about. So your discussions with Mr. Beck and the city's consideration of hot in place on the Kenora bypass and the project in Thunder Bay. So I can take you to those entries if it would be helpful for you to see what they are. But I guess just generally my question is, did you ever have any contact or speak with Dr. Zarowski about hot in place recycling in Hamilton?
No.
Okay. Do you know Dr. Zarowski?
Yes.
Did you have conversations and discussions with Dr. Zarowski more generally about hot in place recycling?
Yes.
But it wasn't related to the Red Hill Valley Parkway or the city of Hamilton?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay. One last area of questions, Ms. Bell. So and sorry, just actually before I go to this this next area, Ms. Bell, which is a little bit of a different subject, going back to your call with Mr. Beck on the 23rd, October in the notes that we have up on screen. You mentioned that there were aggregate concerns and friction concerns, and you referred to the samples, but did you understand if the friction concerns arose from the asphalt samples that Boulder had taken and that you and Mr. Beck had spoken about previously, or from something else?
Mike Beck told me that the samples came back with these friction numbers, as my notes say, samples came back. So I believe he told me that the samples had poor friction, not anything else.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Okay, so now I'm going to take you a little bit forward in time, Ms. Bell, to mid-February 2019, which is following the public disclosure of the Tradewind report and the City of Hamilton becoming aware of friction testing that the MTO conducted from 2008 to 2014 as part of the administration of the DSM list. So, Registrar, if we could call up HAM 54585. And if you could call up, I guess, both images of this document. Thank you. So, Ms. Bell, you aren't copied on these emails. This is communications between Kevin Bentley at the MTO and Edward Soldo, who's at the City of Hamilton. And Miss Lane is also copied in on some of these emails. And so on February 12th, you'll see an email on the right side from Mr. Bentley to Mr. Soldo, in which Mr. Bentley sent, and I can take you to the attachments afterwards, but Mr. Bentley sent a one-page PDF from the Red Hill Valley Parkway mix design. And he also sent a spreadsheet containing friction test results from the northbound and southbound lanes of the of the Red Hill Valley Parkway. And so Becca Lane, who testified in May, when she testified, her evidence was that she provided the documents and the information that Mr. Bentley provided to the City of Hamilton, and that the information that Miss Lane provided to Mr. Bentley, which then went on to the city, was provided to her by staff in the Materials Engineering and Research Office. And Registrar, if we could call up the first attachment to this document, which is HAM 54587. And so while that document's coming up, Ms. Bell, Ms. Lane, her evidence was that she recalled that the city was asking about the SMA mix. And so as a result of that, she came to the bituminous section and spoke to you about the mix design. And she recalled that you located this mix design report that we have on the screen here in Neil Varani's old files. And as I understand it, Mr. Varani was a senior bituminous engineer prior to you. Is that right?
Yes, he was.
Do you recall that discussion with Ms. Lane that led to this mix design report being produced?
No, I don't remember it.
Okay. So is it that you don't remember, or it didn't happen? It's possible it happened, you just don't recall?
It's possible and likely that she asked me to find the mix design. I just don't remember doing it because it's something a minimal task that I would have done for anybody.
Okay. So you don't have any recollection of any discussions with Miss Lane at the time in and around mid-February 2019?
No, I don't remember.
And there was another document that Mr. Bentley provided, which I mentioned, which was the friction testing results of the MTO's friction testing analysis. And so I'll just pull up that document as well for you. Registrar, if you could call up HAM 54586. You might have to call it up in native, actually. It's in Excel, sorry. So Ms. Bell, this is the other document that was attached that Mr. Bentley sent. Have you seen this document before?
No.
Okay, so I take it you didn't have any involvement with either putting together this document or providing it to Ms. Lane?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much, Archer. We can close that out. Just one moment. Thank you, Commissioner. Those are my questions for Ms. Bell.
Okay.
And I understand that counsel for the city may have some questions for Ms. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We don't have any questions for Ms. Bell.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Contractor.
And I'd ask counsel for Golder. I understand they've reserved 5 minutes.
We don't have any questions.
Thank you.
And similarly, Commissioner, I understand counsel for Dufferin also reserved 5 minutes.
Thank you. We don't have any questions for Ms. Bell.
Okay. That leaves Mr. Burrier.
I don't have any questions either for Ms. Bell.
Well, then I think Ms. Bell, simply remains for me to thank you for appearing for the inquiry today and for your evidence. You're excused.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bell.
And Ms. Hendry, if there's nothing further that we have today.
There's not.
There is not?
No.
Then I want to wish everyone a good Canada Day weekend. And we'll stand adjourned until Monday at 9:30.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.